a great pleasure to see many of the Georgian friends, and unfortunately, I can only see the Georgian friends by Zoom. So I would love to see you in person, but then this probably next time.
Yes, we hope that we will have possibility very soon. So for now, Mr. Sergei Sharov, the floor is yours. Your presentation has very, very sad beginning that the future does not need us. So please, say us something calming.
Right, so then, yes, right, okay, so can you see my screen?
Yes, we see it.
Right, okay, so essentially, yes, the title of my talk is a bit pessimistic. But then the reason for this is because it is a copy of a title from a well-received publication, which I wanted to discuss. And those of you who know me, I am not that pessimistic. And I think that what I'm going to talk about, language. And so on the one hand, we are all in linguistic research, so we know that language is important. But quite often we just don't understand how important language is. And I like giving this example. So you are surrounded by oxygen and you don't notice it. And only when your body is deprived of oxygen, for example, because of COVID, very topical at the moment, then you start noticing that this is something which is vital to your life. Exactly the same thing with language. So I am giving this talk through the medium of language. There is no other way for me to share what I want to say with you, right? Then mothers talk to their babies and babies develop their mother tongue. And then finally, if we think about the entire chain, how society is held together, it is held together by communication, by the spread of cultural values. And if this chain of spreading is lost, and this this chain goes through language, and when this is lost, we lose quite a lot of our culture. And to give you one example, if we think about what we know about the Chinese civilization and the ancient Egyptian civilization, we know much more than about the pre-Christian Georgian civilization, for example. And this is precisely because there are no written records, there is only archaeological evidence, right? And this tells us how vital language is. What is language technology? Language technology essentially is a way of improving, so in the ideal case, of improving our human linguistic experience. So applying large-scale artificial intelligence to the task of detecting some bits which are only possible for the humans, right? And so I will move on. I will start by talking about what other people said about the future and what is my position in this respect. And then I will talk about the reasons why a language technology fails and how it can be improved. And I will give some examples from machine translation and from text quality assessment. So sorry, then it is in a completely wrong place. Oops, no, that's not what I wanted. Right, okay, so predictions about the future. So if you think about the title of my talk, this is the title of an article published by Bill Joy. And Bill Joy has some credentials because he is the co-founder of the Sun Microsystems company, and he is behind the internet. He is one of the developers of the TCP/IP protocol, and also he was leading development of the Java programming language. And he didn't write anything about language technology, but he warned that the powerful technologies of the 21st century, they can make humans extinct, right? And this was, and so this means that we need to be thinking carefully about developing these technologies. At the same time, so a response in the community and also in other communities. So Brinson and McAfee, they are economists, and they analyzed the impact of existing technologies, primarily those mentioned by Bill Joy, but they do talk about artificial intelligence in general. And their claim is that They will make people more innovative, more productive, and richer, but at the cost of increasing wealth inequality in society. And when they talked about the problem with increasing wealth inequality, they talked about the American society in the sense that usually it is the lower paid jobs which are likely to get automated in the first instance. And therefore, those in the lower paid and lower skilled jobs will actually lose their jobs. And then this will increase wealth inequality. What I wanted to say is that, and this is very much what has been mentioned here at the conference by people like Andres Vasilyevs earlier, namely that if a language doesn't have a language technology, then this increases inequality in the society across the languages, which have the technology and which don't. And if a language doesn't have a technology in a particular field, then it is quite likely that people will use this language in a certain area of activity less, right? So then for example, there are some attempts of Microsoft for automation of the Microsoft Office Assistant, right? And if then if this goes, then it turns into an automatic secretary. So essentially, it will be able to suggest you ways of meeting people, and then also it will keep track of deadlines, etc. But then if this tool does this only in English and doesn't do this in Georgian, then this essentially, and then it will do this in English and in German, but not in Georgian. Then Georgian has a problem because many Georgian companies are likely to switch to using English just for the benefit of having the automatic secretary, right? In a situation where the use of Georgian would have been much more appropriate. So, and then very relevant to us, another person with very good credentials, Jaap van der Meer. Those of you who are into computer-assisted translation, you know about tools like Trados. And Jaap van der Meer was the first to develop computer-assisted translation tools. The first commonly used cut tool, which is called Ink, was developed by him in the 1980s, right? And he essentially talks about machine translation. And again, Andres Vasilyevs mentioned machine translation a bit earlier. So, and he deliberately, he deliberately titled his blog post in a reference to the article by Bill Joy. So his post is "The Future Doesn't Need Translators." And he explains the situation in which translators are indeed not needed, because if the quality of machine translation is reasonably good, then there is no future for translators. So the counter argument which I always make is that machine translation is based on examples of human translators. And therefore, at least for this task, some translation is needed. And I will talk a little bit more about machine translation later, but we definitely need to take into account the amount of but then this all depends on language resources, and this is the topic for this conference, right? So. And I will be essentially talking about the link between language technology and language resources and how this relates to what we perceive in language, because we are those who produced this language, and we started we were the first actually to show to the machine what is needed, right? And I will show some examples with the problem of ambiguity. So, so there is a difference between how people view ambiguity and what the problem for language technology is. Because I like this quote, which refers to ambiguity. So then when people think about ambiguity, they think that this is exciting. This is unresolved, is the undecided, and this is like a roulette wheel, right? It rouses our blood while it spins. The problem is that ambiguity is everywhere. Right, so every single sentence in any language, in English or in Georgian, it contains examples of ambiguity, and the reason for this is that language is relatively limited. So we have some amount of syntactic constructions, and we have some amount of words, but we can see many more situations in which we need to use language. And language provides a wonderful resource, but the cost for using this resource is that it comes with ambiguity, right? And then John Robert Firth was one of the founders of modern linguistics. He was the chair of the first department of linguistics in the UK. He actually maintained that there is no meaning in an individual word. You know what a word means by the context in which this word is used. And I will start talking later about what I call the natural structure of meanings. So with all respect to people producing dictionaries, what they produce is a kind of so that this describes what the meaning is, but this is a sort of unnatural task, because dictionaries do not exist outside of the task of explaining the meanings. And there are some things which are fairly natural in the sense that they're produced for other purposes, but at the same time, they do contain some information which is relevant for example, for the natural structure of meanings. And in the context of modern language technology, there is one tool which is called embeddings. And embeddings, they follow the method developed by John Rupert Firth. You shall know a word by the company it keeps. So in the sense that you create a representation which produces results for words which are used in similar contexts, right? And by using embeddings, we can say which words are similar in the meaning to the word natural or to the word unnatural. And you can see here quite clearly that natural, it naturally relates to something which is positive, beautiful, abundant, rich, valuable, precious, etc. And this contrasts with unnatural, right? So in exactly the same way, so that this is the natural structure of meanings. So by looking at the company of words, we can get quite a lot about the semantics without knowing, without creating a representation of specially crafted representation. In exactly the same way, it is possible with translation, right? So I can ask you to translate this sentence. So then probably the easiest for the most of you, the easiest to translate this into Georgian. Waves broke on the shore and eventually expired in a froth of myriads of bubbles. You might find a problem in how to render eventually expired in a froth, because this is, again, the word eventually and expired in a froth, they are not used in the first sense indicated in the dictionary. But even if we look at the first words here, waves broke on the shore, then we can see the range of meanings for the word wave, right? And again, in some contexts, it will be translated in exactly the same way, but the meanings are clearly different, right? Ocean waves and radio waves and wave function in quantum mechanics, they're all different. Breaking a vase and breaking a leg, then physically you can probably describe this as the same process, right? Breaking a vase, breaking a leg, and breaking skin. But then in terms of language, when you translate this, it is quite likely that you will use different words, and then breaking promise or breaking silence or breaking law or breaking record, etc. So then these are all different ways in which there is only a limited number of words in English, and you need to represent all those meanings, right, of when something is interrupted, right? And then how this is rendered in other languages, this all depends. So then probably not by exactly the same metaphor as break. And then exactly the same thing with the word bubble. We have housing bubbles or speech thought bubbles in the case of comics, for example, right? And then other contexts. And then if you think the word bubble is relatively unambiguous, then if you go through back translation into another language, so Galician in this particular example, then because the ambiguity in this target language is so variable, then okay, a gallbladder is actually a kind of a bubble, right? And then it emerges, so that the ambiguities, they emerge where you don't expect them to emerge. And then I talked about the lexicon. In exactly the same way, in syntax and in morphology, you have exactly the same range of ambiguities, because eating fish with bones, eating fish with chopsticks. So then with is extreme. This is a very simple, very humble preposition, which links a noun with another noun or with an action. And then the range of possibilities included into the syntactic structure is very large. In exactly the same way, if we look at waves broke on the shore, then broke, syntactically speaking, this is a verb, right? So then it is not ambiguous in this respect, and it is past tense verb. But then in English, only one verb, it is different in the singular or in the plural form when it is in the past, right? So I was, but we were, right? But then broke doesn't change. And then if we take broke on its own, is it singular, plural? We don't know. We need to determine this from the context. In exactly the same way, if we look into French, for example, then broke, it also changes when it is in the past plural form. There is a difference between we broke, or you broke, or they broke, right? So then again, we have variation here. In the case of Russian, the difference in the use of aspect. So we focus either on the event itself. So then this is the linguistic focus. It might be that event lasted, but we only focus on the result of this event, and then we need to use the perfective aspect, as bilis, right? Or if we focus on the ongoing process, then it will be imperfective, they as bivalis, right? And then in exactly the same way, waves. You need to know the syntactic function. In English, it is not explicitly mentioned, and it is definitely needed in order to do some kind of translation, machine translation. And in order to address this, this was understood. This was understood from early on. So then it's the basics. When you start doing machine translation, so you have a sentence, and then you translate. For translating this sentence, you need to build the syntactic structure. It's relatively easy. You can build it, and people started building trees for this. And then you start translating this into another language. So in this case, I took the example of French, and you come across a problem because, as you know, verbs in French in the past tense, they vary according to the number and according to the person. And this essentially means that they need to present the, so then you need to infer this in one way or the other, right? And then also waiting for a train is expressed by a prepositional phrase, and you can't do this in French, so you need to change it into a noun phrase, etc. Right? So the traditional, and this is how all machine translation started in the traditional way through analysis, transfer, and synthesis using handcrafted rules. The very first example from the 1950s, it was a way, a way of demonstrating that this is possible with 6 rules and 250 words, and this was great. And then the expectation was quite high. The problem is that by the 1990s, systems evolved of rule-based machine translation into thousands, many thousands of rules for each individual language pair, and for millions of words in their dictionaries. And again, those of you who remember how this was at the beginning of 1990s, this was still rubbish, right? And the reason for this is precisely because language is so variable. We don't appreciate how variable language is. But what happened in the beginning of the 1990s, first of all, we were tired of creating rules, thousands and thousands of rules, and we never managed to achieve reasonable quality with them. So people switched to natural annotation from parallel corpora, from parallel resources. And the first country to drive the process of digitization of their government activities was Canada. Canada is a bilingual country, so by definition, all the documents produced by the government and by the parliament, they need to be bilingual, English and French. They put this all electronic form, And when this was used, then this created a corpus of 19 million words. So 19 million words, this translates into, if we have 300 words per page, then this translates into roughly 60,000 pages, right, of written text for English, and roughly the same amount for French. But then, so these are the token counts. So then how many words are on a page, right, or in a corpus. So you can also look at the lexicon. So one measure is how many distinct words are there in this corpus. So one problem with this measure is that if you want to do natural annotation on the basis of prior corpora, then you do need recurrent examples, because statistics works by seeing recurrent examples. And because of this, you need a measure something like the words. You only take words, you consider them as suitable for a given task if they occur 10 times or more, right? And then we can see that in this corpus, the lexicon of words which occur 10 times or more is just 12,000. And we know that any good dictionary is longer than this list, right? So then by definition, even this corpus of 60,000 pages was not complete. Right. Then obviously in the case of French is the language of the European Union. So you have about 60 million words in the European Parliament corpus, and French also the language of the United Nations. So we have about 300 million words in the United Nations corpus. But then this is one of the few languages with this amount of obscene amount of resources. If we look at Czech, and I guess that this
ინტერნეტის პრობლემაა.
არც მე არ მესმის მარინა, ეთყობა რაღაცა მასთან არის პრობლემა.
სერგეის ხმა გაწყდა?
როგორც ჩანს, ხო?
თვითონაც გაშეშებულია ვიზუალურად.
გავუკავშირდით როგორმე.
ეთყობა ინტერნეტი გაეთიშა.
მიწერე კოლეგებო ის გვერდთვება გზიდან ფაქტობრივად დაემგზავრა საბერძნეთში, მაგრამ კარგი ინტერნეტი მაქვსო და ეხლა მოგწერე ნაბად.
აფსუს ფილმი კარგ ადგილზე რო გაწყდება, ისე არ გამოვიდა?
კეთება.
ნამდვილად, ესე ყურადღებით რომ უსმენდით და უცებ.
ხო, აბა, მეც ეშკი კონფერენციაზე და ამ დროს
დაგებეკოთ შეიძლება. ეხლა ვერც კი გელაპარაკებით, ისეთი სიტუაცია მაქვს მოხსენება მაქვს რა და დაგირეკავთ რა. ხო არ გამოჩნდა?
არა. გამოჩნდება, ნუ ცოტა ხანი 1-2 წუთი მოვიცადოთ უნდა და გამოჩნდება. მარინა, იქნებ მაინც ჯობს მიწერა.
აი, უნდა მეთქვა, ქალბატონმა იქნებ მეილზე მისწეროთ.
კი, მივიწერე და მეუღლეს ურეკავ თან და ორივე. არ ვიცი ასეთ დროს როგორ უნდა მოვიქცეთ.
უნდა მოვიცადოთ.
ცოტა მოვიცადოთ, ხო?
მით უმეტეს შესვენებაზე დაგვაკლდა დრო და ეხლა ცოტას დავისვენებთ.
ბატონო. არა, ესეთ გახარებულმა მომწერა, რომ ყველაფერი წესრიგშია, აქვს კარგი ინტერნეტი და ემზადება შესახვედრად და რა მოხდა ახლა ასე უცებ, არ ვიცი, ვერ გეტყვით.
თვითონ თუ იცის რომ გამოვარდა, თვითონ ხო არ აგრძელებს მოხსენებას.
არა, ახლა მაგდენს კი მივხვდება.
ტელეფონით დარეკვის საშუალება არ გვაქვს ქალბატონო მარინა.
ტელეფონით არა გვაქვს და მეუღლეს ცოტა ხნის წინ ველაპარაკებოდი და ახლა ვურეკავ და იმასაც ვერ ვაგონებ. ტელეფონი არა აქვს. არ ვიცი უფრო სწორად მე მათი ტელეფონი.
ე ბატონო.
ქალბატონმა ოფისიდან იყო ჩართული თუ არა, იმიტომ რომ ოფისის ნომერი უწერიათ ვებგვერდზე და შეგვიძლია დავრეკოთ თქვა.
საბერძნეთში არიან, მაკა გუშინ.
ხო, მაშინ არ გამოვა.
ხო, ხო, დილით იმიტომ უნდა წაკითხვა, რომ ეგ მიდიოდნენ და ეხლა მოეწყო ეგ და ეს აქნა.
Okay, hello everyone. I just want to announce that I am back because it all stopped because of the problems with the internet connection. I apologize for breaking this. I will try doing the presentation, okay, and then I will try being a bit quicker in what I wanted to cover, so that no time is lost. Right. Okay. Can you see my slide now?
Yes, we can.
Good, thank you, and apologies for this. Right, what I wanted to say is that obviously there is a limit in what you can achieve by using parallel resources, especially for the smaller languages, because then the corpus of user-generated subtitles cannot be representative for many areas of language use, and therefore you can pay more attention to monolingual resources. So then in this case, if you have a corpus for English and a corpus for Georgian or a corpus for Czech for that matter, then you have a comparable corpus, and then you can achieve quite a lot by using some kind of statistical analysis on what is on what is there, right? So, and this activity has been recognized as a valid activity for quite some time. So the British National Corpus, Tony McInerney, who presented yesterday, He was quite instrumental in development of the BNC. He was in the original British National Corpus team. But then again, by modern standards, even the British National Corpus with just nearly 100 million words is a tiny corpus. So there is a corpus called UK WAC, which was produced by crawling the internet, the web pages from the United Kingdom internet domain, and in this respect, it was designed to be reasonably similar to British English, right? And it is much bigger, and then you have Wikipedia, and then the other corpus is the Common Crawl corpus. The Common Crawl is an attempt to collect as many pages from the internet as possible, and from the open internet, obviously, and then to extract them according to the specific languages. So then the English part of the DEPCC, when it was extracted, it is a corpus of about 250,000 billion words, right? So then it is just about 2,000 and 5,000 times bigger than the BNC, right? And then, so this is the English part of a comparable corpus. So what is available for other languages? And if we take Georgian, so together with Sofia Daraselia, who also presented at this conference, we tried creating a corpus for Georgian. And this corpus, so we tried to replicate UK WAC, and then the reason why it's called KWAC is precisely because as a way of replicating, and we managed to get about 160 million words. This was done in 2014. So first of all, second, we could have doubled this size, but not much more, because it was quite difficult to get enough data for Georgian, right? So, and then you can't actually replicate a corpus of 200 billion words in the case of a smaller language. But at least this is an attempt of getting as much data as possible. And then why do you need this? So then if you look at as much data as possible, then the question is, why do you need as much data? So because the lexicon, if we measure L10 lexicon for the BNC, this is about 90,000 words. If you look at the lexicon of the DEPCC, this is 18 million words, right? It's nice to have a lexicon of 18 million words. Is it reasonable? So if we look at the words at the bottom of the frequency list of the Common Crawl corpus, then some words are fairly okay, they're not reasonable, because diabetes is a misspelling of diabetes, and rage is a creative spelling. Someone was really in rage, was experiencing this feeling, right? And then repeated rage as much as possible. So but then all other words are real, right? So adjudicating, it is not a typo. In adjudicating, this is a legal term. It exists. Then bare mount is, so then this is normally used in kind of fantasy fiction. So then if you have a mount, and if you want to mount a bear, then you need a bear mount, right? And finally, beard discrimination, which is an example I like. So I wear a beard, and I was amazed to find an example of this kind, and it looks like this is a real example. So you have 10 examples in the Common Crawl corpus, and if you Google, then you find about 300. Pardon? Right. Can you still see my slides? Yes, good. Right. Okay. So if you look at the examples, then okay. So Google has about 300 examples, and they're all real. And there is even a dictionary definition of beard discrimination. By the way, this word is spelled without I, right after D. Okay. So this is all nice. This is all good. How can we use? So if we have resources of this size, so how can we use all of this? So, and the answer comes from language models, right? So language models, so if you use predictive typing on your smartphone, then you used a language model. And neural language models are quite nice because they encode, so they appeared about 20 years ago, and they're quite nice by generalizing the contexts, right? And by generalizing the context, you can get very interesting artifacts. So then if you ask your phone, first of all, your phone is trained on examples from, it is primarily trained on examples from face-to-face communication. But if you train your phone on Shakespeare, so in this case, a language model was trained on Shakespeare, and it started producing a text which looks like English, and what is more, it looks like a text which can be produced by Shakespeare, could have been produced by Shakespeare, but obviously it doesn't have a meaning. But who is but a chain and subjects of his death? I should not sleep, right? Absolutely no meaning at all, but then it looks Shakespearean, very much Shakespearean, right? And this is the power of language models. And then the next step, you convert essentially this into, so then people realized that you can also predict ambiguities in language, right? So when you have book as a noun and as a verb, then you can probably predict what is what by, so then if instead of generating a sequence from Shakespeare, you generate a sequence of part of speech nouns, right? And in exactly the same way, you can also do this in translation, right? So then you translate this into, so for example, you have a sentence in English, and then the task of the language model is to produce it in French, for example, right? And it does this brilliantly by the use of embeddings, because embeddings, this is a sequence of numbers, and the idea is that the sequences of numbers, they're similar for words which are somehow similar. And then the neural network model essentially combines the sequences in order to produce a new sequence. And then amazingly, if you apply this task to machine translation, then you have the first stage in which you have a text. And for this text, for each individual word, the numbers are combined until you get in the encoder part, some kind of a sequence of numbers, which magically represents the meaning of the sentence. And then you start asking the model to do on the French side, how to do generation, and it predicts the first word, and then with the first word it predicts the second word, etc., and then it generates a sentence. And then if you look at Google, at how Google does this nowadays, this is done on the basis of this model, right? So and it is quite surprising how well this model works and how trainable it is. So these are some examples. So I don't have an example for Georgian, but I do have an example for German and for Chinese. And most of the time, people agree that that when you use a language model, then predictions are so then if you do translation predictions. So in comparison to the previous technology, the statistical translation model, translations are usually much better, right? So the problem is that you start trusting the model, and then you have a neural machine translation output, which looks like nothing particularly impressive about world trade in real currencies and financial products. It looks better than what you have, what has been produced by the statistical machine. And then
ბატონო ჯემალ, გამორთეთ მიკროფონი თუ შეიძლება. ბატონ ჯემალს მე მივმართავ ანთიძეს, გამორთეთ მიკროფონი.
Okay, thanks Tinatin, thanks. Right.
Very sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Right. Okay. So and then you think that the right translation is probably what neural machine translation produced, unless you look into the German example. And in the German example, and then in the human translation of this example, it is clear that statistical machine translation was actually closer, even though it was not fluent, right? So finance products is a worse translation than financial products, but there is comparison, and this was lost in a neural machine translation. And this is why, so then my favorite example about this is that you have something, you have the original meaning, which resembles something like please close the door. And the neural machine translation produces something like please open the window, right? Because from the viewpoint of embeddings, door and window, they are often used in similar contexts. Closing the door and opening the window, they occur in similar contexts, and therefore the translations are actually, okay, so then the translation produced by neural machine translation are quite often. So, okay, it depends how often. In some languages, such as the English-French pair, this doesn't happen very, very often, but still. So you have examples of this kind, right? And one of the things is actually to spot this, right? So can we suspect, especially when we don't speak a language? So imagine that you don't speak German, right? If you have a sentence like there is nothing particularly impressive about world trade, so you trust it. You think that the author actually thought that that there was nothing particularly impressive about world trade, right? But then the original did mean this. And can we suspect that statistical machine translation was actually going wrong? And then you can set this as a set of tasks, namely that you can do prediction of catastrophic errors, or you can predict the number of changes, such as the post-editing rate, right? And or you can predict the time it takes to correct this, right? So then, if you have a sentence, so then this is the meaning of the sentence, and then you have neural machine translation. So one of the things is that at this stage you don't have human translation, because this human translation is shown as a reference, but it is not what. So then, when you do post-editing, you don't have this example at all, right? You need to produce something which can be used as suitable translation on the basis of what is written in this neural machine translation output. And essentially what you can do is that you can essentially remove there is, you replace about with compared to, and then this leads to an estimate of 4 out of 14 words needs to be changed, or it takes, so then you can measure this and it takes this amount of time. And you can build a model in exactly the same way as your model, the previous model, the neural machine translation model predicts the translation. This model predicts the amount of changes. And if the amount of changes is large, right? So then for many of the previous examples, the amount of changes was relatively small. For this example, it is large, or you think that the amount of time it takes to change it is relatively large because you need to spot where the error is, right? So essentially, NMT in this case spots the error. Then you can get something, right? So some kind of prediction. So you can also extend this a bit further in collaboration with my former PhD student. We also tried to do prediction of human translation quality. So I trust no one in this audience speaks Chinese, and if you have examples of translation, so you have a source in English, and you have many translations into Chinese, then they look probably all right to you. All of them look all right, right? They were all produced by human student translators, right? This was part of a test for students and for student translators. And then you also have translations by Google and Bing, and with the back translations there. And the good translations, they reflect what is there, but they are all different. And again, so it's amazing. So those of you who do translation, you know how variable translation is. So then for the same sentence, and even for a very simple sentence like this one, boredom and apathy characterize this marriage, then you will find many different ways of expressing this, which are all acceptable. But then the number of errors, and it's interesting that the number of errors, so this kind of error produced by the student is completely counterfactual, right? So it's not that mutual boredom and apathy led to the marriage, but then boredom and apathy characterize this marriage, right? It might have been actually much better in the beginning, right? And so then with this you can actually produce a little bit better. So then you can produce a model which can detect where the errors are, right? So I will essentially skip the examples here. So what is important is that you can produce a reliable model here, right? So, and the model is more reliable by using again neural methods. The model will become more reliable than many other models, right? So then in this case, so then if you take one of the standard models for predicting quality estimation, so this is done with the aim of doing this for machine translation, right? Then if if the correlation is as low as 0, I mean that it is essentially 0, there is no correlation at all. And in this case, correlation is not ideal, but at least this is something, right? And you can predict the number of errors according to the typology from the American Translator Association, right? So I will again, so then because there was a break, so I will try going very, very briefly through the set of examples. So these are examples of predicting text quality for translation, either machine translation or human translation, right? Now we can start with the idea of having the translation quality in the sense of, so looking at the quality of a text. So if we have a range of texts, these are texts from the United Nations, then you can see again, so that there is a variation in terms of quality here, right? So what we did in collaboration with the United Nations and with the World Trade Organization, we essentially experimented with their data, and again, so then I will not explain how this has been done. So then one of the results is that we have timed sentences in French, right? And then how long it took to translate a sentence from English into French, right? And then and depending on the length of the sentence. And so we have the prediction line here, and most of the sentences are within the prediction line, with the exception of several outliers. And this is precisely where we need to look at. So what is the reason why there is a difficulty in translating those sentences? Because in comparison to other sentences, it took a bit longer to translate them. And so then this is one of the tasks. And then some other tasks you can also do on the language of text of this kind. So then you can very much like you can predict the parts of speech. You can predict time spans, which is quite important for understanding. You can predict named entities, so who this person is and what is the office this person holds, or you can predict terminology, right? So some other things which again within the same range of how language technology is likely to be useful is that if you want to find authentic text suitable for language learners, and many of you know that basis of detecting whether this text is more suitable for a learner who is A2 or a learner who is B1, right? And then we essentially experimented with a range of languages. So then this is an example for English. So essentially, we can predict easy texts and more difficult texts quite reliably. We can't predict the borderline cases, and this is why. So in the next experiment, which I'm going to show, is that we focused specifically on what is easy versus what is difficult. So what you can do. So on the one hand, you can say which texts are inherently, so then which texts have a higher proportion of difficult and easy texts. Again, you know that I've been working on classification of genres and detecting genres on the web automatically. So in this particular case, we have, so then, for example, promotional texts, and it's a kind of understandable, promotional text instructions and newswire texts. They tend to be, the proportion of easier texts in them is higher, right? So this is one of the things you can, at least for English. So again, the examples are specifically for English, right? And then if you look at texts like fiction or legal text, the proportion of easy texts there is lower. Okay, we can expect this for legal text, but fiction is often used as a prime example for teaching students how to use a foreign language. And this study shows that this is not the case, right? So, and then the other thing which you can again do if you employ language technology in the right way is that you can also predict which features are associated with easy or difficult texts, right? So then in this particular case, this is specifically for instruction, and this is different for instructional text, for example, and for newswire texts. So then I will only give you one example. So then you can see that for instructional texts in English, the use of the second-person pronouns is quite predictive for easy texts in comparison to difficult texts. And in the case of news, there are various reasons why so pages which use second-person pronouns, they contain more difficult language, right? So that's it. And then the last example I wanted to show is coming from our from our recent research on COVID. So very, very topical nowadays. So essentially what we wanted to understand so what is the difference between different kinds of texts circulating on the web on the topic of COVID, right? And then on various subtopics of COVID. So then in this particular case with face masks, and we can see that when the governments, they were actually against, the Western governments, they were against advising wearing masks, right? There were many users which actually in different areas of the web, which were very much in favor of wearing masks. And this is a kind of thing which you can detect by using language technology, right? So then you have a distribution of various topics. So then we detected some topics of concern, and we developed classifiers to select texts of this kind. We also selected, again, genres, so a generic approach to genres in terms of communicative functions. So what kinds of texts about COVID circulate in social media? So argumentation text, or advice, or reporting, or propaganda, etc., and also sentiment with respect to each topic, whether the sentiment is generally positive or negative, right? The current project we do with language technology, it concentrates on misinformation, right? And the particular aspect in which language technology can help you in assessing misinformation is by understanding what makes which readers forward what with respect to misinformation, right? So for example, so whether people forward misinformation containing advice or basic reference information or propaganda or reporting more, then whether emotions, when there is emotion expressed, or whether a text is easier to read or more difficult to read, right? Whether they forward them more or less. Or then we can also use some kind of ethical profiling. So we can, if we have classifiers for age, for example, right? Whether the misinformation is more active for, whether people who are older or younger are more likely to share misinformation about COVID or not, right? Then there is also a possibility of taking into a little bit into their values and worldviews. And one example here is that some people, they naturally are in favor of promoting individual freedoms, and some other people, they put forward what is more important is the value for the society rather than the individual freedom. And surprisingly, so in our research, there is some support for this, is that that promoting individual freedoms, this usually associated with the more right-wing views, and then this leads, statistically speaking, to less mask use, and then this leads to higher COVID death rate. So then you have two completely opposite things. One is the COVID death rate, and another is promoting individual freedoms. And now we see that there is a statistical link between them. So we also wanted to experiment with cognitive biases as well, but we haven't done anything on this side yet. Right. Okay. So I'm just to recap, and I know that because of the break, I talked a bit longer than I wanted. So don't forget that language provides the backbone of society. Society breaks if there is no language, and language technology is essentially what provides the easier backbone for the society. Right. The society becomes more efficient in the ideal case. Right. But then, on the one hand, so language technology, if we think about English as language technology, right? So, but then if you think about lesser resource languages like Georgian, then obviously there is a kind of a problem, because the resources available, they are much smaller, and then probably more is needed to be done in this area. And Andres Vasilyevs yesterday put a very good case in favor of developing language resources for specific languages, right? So the other thing is that often language technology is a threat to traditional ways of using language, and the specific example is machine translation, right? So definitely machine translation threatens the way how human translators operate. But then, according to what the economists say, that so if we paraphrase this with respect to language technology, that language technology can make language users more innovative, productive, and richer, right? But then if it is deployed properly, and then there is a range of applications which have direct, actually, so then I will also mention the other thing is that the subtitle of the work of the economists on this claim make language users in this case more innovative, productive, and richer was racing against the machine or working with the machine. And this is why I very much recommend working with the machine. And working with the machine, one of the possibilities here is using the machine in order to do some predictions on text quality, because it can do predictions on text quality much faster. It can do predictions on millions of web pages. So this prediction might be not very accurate. So then you need to take into account how accurate this prediction is, but this can help. It can help in translation, and not only in machine translation, but also in human translation. You can spot catastrophic errors. You can grade the translations of your students, or you can do essay scoring. You can predict audience engagement, or how COVID misinformation flows, or how we teach languages, right? So the important thing is that I talked from two perspectives here, and actually my background combines the two perspectives. On the one hand, good computer science, because you do need to represent statistics in a way which is reliable and truthful to your data, right? And you can't do this without good understanding of computer science. But then also, when computer scientists without collaboration with linguists start working and produce models, then quite often the models are rubbish without linguistic insights. And you do need good understanding of what linguistics, what is the background, what is again, how humans actually use language. Right, okay, thank you very much. And okay, let's, if there is time, I'm very hope to take questions.
Thank you very much once again. We have time for the questions, comments, and suggestions, please. Yes, of course, please. Diach ბატონო კოტებ, ძანეთ.
მე ვერ მითქი სათაურში რატოა ეს ფრაზა მომავალს არ ვჭირდებით?
იმედია ითარგმნება, ხო ეს?
ინგლისურად დავსვა თუ ითარგმნება?
დიახ, ითარგმნება ყველა.
Okay, so thanks. Right. Okay. So then actually this is just a homage to the title of the paper produced by Bill Joy in 2000. Right. So he wrote this influential paper, "The Future Doesn't Need Us." Right. And he said that the danger with human technologies is that they make humans extinct. So this is just so then this is the main argument of his paper, and I wanted to link this to the current state of language technology. So obviously this this is not everything which we know about language, and I think that I tried to dispel this actually, right? So this was this claim was in contrast to what Bill Joy produced. So then in my last slide, I can return to sharing my last slide. Language technology is not a threat, but then it is a threat to some aspects. So for example, traditional human translators, they're quite likely to get extinct, right? So if they don't embrace the power of language technology. In exactly the same way, some languages, if they don't develop language technology, they will become extinct because, or at least the number of areas in which they operate, it will be much more restricted. So in this respect, no, future definitely needs us. So in that sense, this is very clear. But then, so there are also some problems, and we need to anticipate what are the problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So any other questions?
May I ask one question?
Of course, please.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Sergey, thank you very much for this very impressive presentation. It was very interesting, and I think the approach was is accepted by most of people who research in this branch. So my question is: so your final message was that we need to recognize and to take in account the use of language and the users of the language. And what I think about is the translation of machinal translation of idiomatic expressions, so culturally backgrounded expressions in a language. For a few days, I looked for one expression in the European Parliament in a speech of our European parliamentarian from Scotland with the follow sentence, may I cited it. Arguments like, hit me now with a child in my arms. So, and the machinal translation in German was unfair arguments. I was really wonder how, it's very good translation, I would say. And what do you think about the future of translation expressions like this? Because I asked many English native people, what do you think about hit me now with a child in my arms? They didn't know what it means. So if you do not have the cultural background and the history of this expression, you can translate it, and no problem, word by word, but it's not the real meaning of it. So what do you think about it?
This is, yeah, and this is why the work on comparable corpora is very, very important here. And this is also why modern machine translation is so much better, because it doesn't rely on evidence exclusively from parallel texts. In parallel, then if you think about, then you saw the examples of single words. So then when you have the lexicon of 18 million words, and then via discrimination was at the very bottom of the list. And this was for single words only. And this was in a huge corpus of 25 billion words, right? So no, 2,500 billion words, right? So in order to take into account rare expressions, you definitely need a lot of data. And the way comparable corpora work, they find similarities in the typical contexts in which words are used across languages on the basis of monolingual data. Then the typical contexts, they are aligned, right? And then the alignment of those typical contexts, in the end, it leads to a very impressive approach in which, so then as you said, I don't speak German, but I'm pretty convinced that so if you rate this translation as acceptable, then it's actually great, because this means that neural machine translation managed to find the typical context of use, which are similar to the English, so the typical context of use in German, which are similar to what was in the English source. Yep, thank you.
So, is there any other question? So at least we have 2 minutes.
კი ბატონო, ანუ წინა კომენტართან დაკავშირებით მეც ვიტყვი ერთ კომენტარს. როგორც ბატონმა აღნიშნა, ეს ციფრული ტექნოლოგიების განვითარება ხელს უწყობს ადამიანების ინოვაციურობას, პროდუქტიულობას, სიმდიდრეს, თუმცა უთანასწორობის გაზრდის ხარჯზე, ხომ? და ამით ზოგადად ამ კონფერენციის მიზნებსაც გამოვეხმაურებოდი, რომ თუ დავაკვირდებით ეს მწირრესურსიანია სწორედ ის ენები, რომლებსაც დიდი კორპორაციები, რომლებისგან დიდი კორპორაციები, ასე ვთქვათ, ნაკლებ სარგებელს მიიღებენ, ხო? შესაბამისად, ეს საქმე, ჩემი აზრით, არ უნდა მივანდოთ აი ამ კერძო სექტორს და ამაზე პასუხისმგებლობა უნდა აიღოს სწორედ სახელმწიფო დაწესებულებებმა, როგორც არის ჩვენი ენის დეპარტამენტი და სახელმწიფო უნივერსიტეტები, ხო? და ეს იმასაც შეუწყობს ხელს, რომ ეს ტექნოლოგიების და რობოტიკის განვითარებით გამოთავისუფლებული დრო, რაზეც იყო ასევე ლაპარაკი, რესურსები და თალიფხები ცალკეული კომპანიების სარგებელს და გამდიდრებას კი არ მოემსახურება, არამედ სწორედ ისევ ადამიანების ინოვაციურობას, პროდუქტიულობას და გამდიდრებას. და ამასთან სწორედ სახელმწიფო ინსტიტუტების ჩართულობამ უნდა უზრუნველყოს ის, რომ რაზეც ასევე იყო ლაპარაკი, რომ ეს არ გახდეს უთანასწორობის წყარო, ხო? სწორედ ამიტომ მოკლედ გასახარი რომ ამ პროცესებს უხელმძღვანელებს სახელმწიფო ენის დეპარტამენტი და
სახელმწიფო
და დიდი იმედი მაქვს რომ ეს სამუშაო კოორდინირებულად შესრულდება. მოკლედ უბრალოდ ამ კომენტარის გაკეთება მინდოდა ამ
ძალიან დიდი მადლობა
თაობთან დაკავშირებით მოკლედ.
დიახ, უთანასწორობა ერთ-ერთი სერიოზული პრობლემაა ტექნოლოგიებთან დაკავშირებული. ერთი მხრივ ვამბობთ რომ ტექნოლოგიების არის არა მხოლოდ მომავალი, არამედ დღევანდელი დღე და მეორე მხრივ გვაქვს ენების უზარმაზარი რაოდენობა დედამიწის მასშტაბით, არ ვლაპარაკობ სახელმწიფო და ოფიციალურ ენებზე, რომლებიც არა ძალიან მწირი რესურსების, ან საერთოდ რესურსო არიან ტექნოლოგიური თვალსაზრისით. ამიტომ თქვენ რაც ბრძანეთ, რასაკვირველია სახელმწიფოს უნდა ესმოდეს მნიშვნელობა იმისა, რომ ისეთი ენები, როგორც მაგალითად ქართულია, დაფინანსებული იყოს სახელმწიფოს მხრიდან და არა კერძო კორპორაციების მხრიდან. ახლა კი მე ველი ბატონ რუბენ მარტინეს. Dear Mr. Ruben Martinez, are you
yes,
here?
I fully support this. I fully support this view. So thank you very much. If this, at least, I presented my own perspective and the kind of research I have been doing. Again, so I have been doing some research on Georgian, and this is a way of supporting what is needed for the Georgian language. But then, obviously, the actors in Georgia and then primarily the academic community with the support of the government, they need to invest more in order to improve the state of the art with the Georgian language. But then the other thing which I wanted to mention is that Georgian language is not the only language spoken in Georgia, because on the one hand we have Migrelian and Swan, and these are obviously also important languages, and they are under greater danger actually at the moment, right? And then also Abkhazian, then this is a language under the patronage of Georgia, and then again helping with the language resources. Yeah, thank you. So then this is definitely an area in which the government, the state needs to be involved. Yeah, thank you.